When you think of fungi, you probably think of like a little mushroom or maybe the mold on a piece of bread or something like that. But they're even more diverse than that, and they play a really important role in our lives. Most of them more helpful to us than harmful. One of the most important roles is recycling organic material. By breaking down dead plants and animals, they make all those nutrients available to other living organisms. So what sort of places do fungi live? They're mostly land-loving, but they especially like areas that are really damp. So they like damp soil, damp wood. They even infiltrate lots of the parts of a plant, from the trunk to the leaves. They just seem to get in everywhere. And most of the fungi are not the mushrooms above the ground. That's a really small part of the life cycle. They're these tiny little threads that grow into the soil. Kind of like that fuzzy stuff you see on bread when it grows mold. So that's really kind of where fungi are. They can't move at all. No fungus can get up and walk, it can't swim, crawl, nothing like that. They move either by growing or the mushrooms produce spores and those spread out on the wind. That's basically all they got. Normally fungi don't give us much of a problem because we're warm. They tend to like cooler places. So our body heat seems to be one of our main defenses against fungi. They still do give us problems sometimes, like with athlete's foot, and fungi are incredibly irritating. Our body hates them, and our immune system reacts violently, and so they cause a lot of itching and pain when they do flare up. When it comes to the structure of fungi, they're fairly simple. They're made of many cells arranged in these threads. Those threads are called hyphae, and we can see them in this microscope image, all these little pink threads, along with this one has these kind of microscopic mushrooms, basically. When all those hyphae aggregate, then they form a mycelium, like you see in this mold growing over a bunch of coffee grounds. There are a few that are unicellular, like the ones used to make wine and beer and even bread. And so those are the yeasts, but many yeasts have multicellular components as well. So for the most part, fungi are decently large, although it's hard to spot them unless they're the mushrooms that pop up above the ground. Each of their cells is surrounded by a cell wall. And this is actually something kind of interesting. Biochemically, it seems like fungi are kind of like the cousins of animals. And I'll tell you why. So their cell walls are made of something called chitin, which is exactly the same material, it's a type of carbohydrate, that insects use to build their exoskeletons, those shells around them. That's kind of strange. And on the inside of the fungus, when they store energy, they store it as glycogen. Same stuff that we store in our muscles and our liver for use a little bit later. Really kind of strange there. The mushroom is usually the most familiar part of a fungus, but their job is just to make spores and help the fungus disperse, kind of spread out on the forest floor or wherever they might be. Not all mushrooms are big. Here we see a microscopic view of one. They're the red threads invading this plant leaf in here, and they're going to produce these little tiny microscopic mushrooms to spread spores. When it comes to reproduction, like so many other organisms, fungi are pretty flexible. They can reproduce asexually or sexually. When two parents join genetic forces, that's sexual reproduction, but it looks kind of strange in fungi. Let's take a look at the life cycle here for a minute. Here's ground level, and very little of that life cycle is spent above ground. Again, the mushrooms spread these spores, which land in the soil and then start to grow into these thread-like hyphae. It's when two hyphae meet and join up that they actually merge their genetic material. That's kind of like the fungus version of mating. And then they keep producing hyphae, which eventually form a mushroom, which then divides again and makes spores. Very different than our life cycle. So asexual reproduction is just about as common, if not more so, where little fragments break off and you start a new fungus entirely. So what do fungi do for energy? Well, just about anything organic, they'll eat it. Now they don't eat it like we do. They actually secrete enzymes to break down their food and then absorb it into their cells, right? Because they're not big like us. They're just these little threads. And mushrooms, certainly, you never see them eating anything. But the range of things that they can break down is remarkable. And so they have lots of different enzymes. They're really powerful decomposers. And this is extremely important. I want you to understand this point. Decomposition means that they're taking organic material and breaking it down into smaller bits. Otherwise, if things died and just stayed put, one, the earth would just kind of fill up with dead stuff that would never break down. And two, since all these materials, phosphorus, nitrogen, etc., are in limited supply, we do not have an infinite amount of nitrogen, for example, then it would be locked away in all that dead material. And so fungi, by breaking it down, release it and make it available for new living beings. We take advantage of this when we ferment things. The examples I gave you before, even soy sauce is an example of a fermented product based on fungi. And these are the ones that produce these thread-like structures that grow over soybeans and produce different compounds that are really rather flavorful, which is what gives soy sauce its amazing seasoning ability. Now fungi will eat anything, living or dead. Most of it's dead stuff, but they do, like in this example here, actually prey on some living material underneath the soil, like little tiny nematodes or those roundworms under the soil. A lot of times they're doing battle with bacteria because bacteria live in the soil as well. They're all trying to eat this dead material, and so fungi produce some really important compounds, some toxins that they release to kill bacteria. Now, we don't think of molds very favorably. They cause a lot of problems, especially if you're allergic to them, and they rot our food, like this thing on an orange over here. But some molds, like penicillin, can be very useful. Since they've been doing battle with bacteria underground for millennia, then this mold spore that's landed on this petri dish has started secreting some substance that's actually created this kill zone for this bacteria, the kind of whitish colored substance. And this is where we get many of our antibiotics from, is they're secreted by fungi. They harm us sometimes too. All of our skin that breaks down and even hair has lots of protein in it, and fungi would love to break that down. So a lot of times they stay on the surface, they get washed away pretty frequently when we bathe, and they don't cause any problems. Sometimes in fungal infections like athlete's foot or jock itch or ringworm, they'll start penetrating a little lower into the skin and cause some pretty severe irritation. But for the most part, fungi tend to leave us alone, but when they do invade us, those problems can get real serious real fast. So fungi, more than just mushrooms. So from their production of antibiotics to their role as decomposers, they really play an important role on Earth. I'd be curious to know if you can think of any other roles of fungi that you might share in the comments. Love to hear from you. Until next time, keep appreciating life.